So let's talk loyalty in sports here, because the news broke earlier today in one of the most heartbreaking trades I think imaginable. Okay, so the Bucks traded Kris Middleton, which not that big of a deal in a vacuum. Kris Middleton was the third best player on the Milwaukee Bucks. It was clearly the Giannis and Dame show. Middleton was hurt for a lot of this season. He struggled with injuries last season. That's part of the reason why the Bucks were as disappointing as they were last year. When they have title aspirations, and they don't get to the Eastern Conference Finals, that's a problem. So Middleton traded to the Wizards, ends one of the franchise's cornerstones, multiple player deal that sends Kyle Kuzma to Milwaukee. That's according to Shams. The Bucks also sent A.J. Johnson, a first-round selection last year, with Washington. They dealt Patrick Baldwin Jr. in the second round to Milwaukee. Middleton spent 11-plus seasons in Milwaukee and was a foundational player for a championship run. This is the part that really bothers me. So you're talking about a guy who won a championship with your organization, the first one that they'd won in 50-plus years, three-time All-Star, played in the games, minutes, points, assists, three-pointers made in a 12-season career. It absolutely is heartbreaking that a guy like Middleton is on his way out. And it's not only heartbreaking because you like Kris Middleton. I like Kris Middleton. He seemed like a good guy. He seemed like the type of player who every team would want on their roster. He's a winning guy. He's a guy that's willing to do the dirty work. The problem is age, A, and B, the fact that he gets sent to Washington. Of all of the teams to send one of your cornerstone pieces. Now, is he Ray Allen? Is he, one of those all-time great Bucks players? Will Milwaukee fans remember him the same way they remember Giannis? Absolutely not. But you're talking about a team in Washington this season that is in the bottom of the standings, the literal dumpster fire of an organization. That, to me, is the problem here. And we went through this whole thing with Luka, with sending Dallas Mavericks, superstar, generational talent, a guy that across the board is respected. Across the board, people talk about Luka Doncic as a generational talent. And you send him to LA without calling him, without talking to his agent, without getting any indication that he did not want to be in your city, did not want to wear your jersey. No indication of that, and you sent him away with the idea that maybe this will make us a little bit better. Now, Nico Harrison, the GM of the Mavericks, has a lot of explaining to do. I personally think it's one of the worst trades in professional sports history. I've compared it to Babe Ruth getting sent from the Red Sox to the Yankees. That's how bad of a deal I think this trade will go down in history as. But you're looking at a situation with Luka where, okay, we think we're going to get a little bit better. I would argue with Kuzma, he is not any better. That this is actually a downgrade in a lot of ways. The efficiency that Kyle Kuzma struggles with, driving the basketball, making smart passes, shooting the ball well, all things you need to do to win games in the NBA, Kuzma doesn't do any of those things. He is, in a lot of people's mind, and mine included, a failure. He got a big contract to go to Washington, and him and Jordan Poole have combined this season for 8 wins. And for Washington to get a guy like Kuzma, you hope that it brings some sort of semblance of winning. That a guy who has won a championship can get in that locker room with the rest of those players, those young guys, and convince them that it's important to do all the little things right. Because that's the one thing that Middleton did better than probably 90% of the NBA, was knew his role and did the little things correctly. The small things that help you win games, he did. You hope that you're getting a guy back in Middleton who can help build that locker room up. I don't know if that's going to be the case. We were talking off air a little bit earlier, a friend of mine and I, about maybe that this is the type of move that you trade for Middleton, immediately cut Middleton, and let him go chase a championship somewhere else. He is older when you talk about the age, 33 years old. He was hampered by injuries these recent seasons. He's recovering from an offseason surgery on both ankles. His limited production this season, less than 13 points per game. It's the lowest scoring he's had since 2013, 2014, so almost a decade ago. He's owed $31.7 million and has a player option for next season. Kuzma makes 23. That helps the Milwaukee Bucks when it comes to the aprons and the roster management of this team. But there's absolutely no loyalty in sports, at least in the NBA today. And it's going to make fans resent their teams, because the NBA is the only sport where the name on the back of the jersey matters as much as the name of the front. It's the only sport that is so star-driven. I've never seen a fan, I've never seen one of these podcasters wear a football jersey backwards. I've never seen somebody wear a Mahomes jersey backwards so Mahomes sits on the front of their chest versus on their back. I've never seen somebody wear a Brady jersey or a Ray Lewis jersey backwards so the last name sat on the front of the chest instead of on their back. There are numerous instances of podcasters I have seen wearing Wembanyama jerseys, LaMelo Ball jerseys, Giannis jerseys, and now Luka jerseys backwards so that the last name sits on the front instead of on the back. The NBA is a star-driven league, and when ownership and front offices are essentially cutting the stars out of the equation completely, when the ownership and front offices, for the most part, are turning their backs on their stars, turning their backs on any sort of loyalty, that's a problem. And we heard earlier this week Anthony Edwards talk about it. We heard Nikola Jokic talk about it. All these different guys saying that, hey, you know, this could happen to anybody. This could happen to any star. That one day you're sitting pretty, you think that you're going to be in Minnesota, in Denver, in Oklahoma City, in Dallas. You think you're going to be there forever, and then just one day, everything changes. And I said if I was Tim Conley, if I was Mike Malone in Denver, if I'm Sam Presti in Oklahoma City, I'm sitting down with my guys, Anthony Edwards, Nikola Jokic, SGA, Victor Wembanyama in San Antonio, and I'm pulling them aside and say, listen, the way that Dallas did Luka, we would never do you, big boy. Hey, big fella, we would never make that happen to you, Jokic. That would never happen in Minnesota, Ant. SGA, we would never consider moving you to try to rebuild some of that good grace, to try to rebuild some of those bridges that you have to have in a league that is driven by stars, in a league that is owned by the players for the most part. You have to make sure you have good relationships. It's a non-starter if you don't. You won't survive. Your franchise cannot win. You cannot build an organization that has any sort of success in the NBA if you don't have that loyalty. Baseball's loyalty died a long time ago. The minute that arbitration became as popular as it's become, when owners and management sits across from a player and tells them all the things they don't do well, when you're sitting across the table from Albert Pujols or Mike Trout or Bryce Harper and you're telling them that, you know, you're a great player, Bryce, but we just don't think that you can play at the level that you did 5 years ago, so we're not going to give you that massive extension you're asking for. Arbitration in baseball essentially severed the ties between ownership and the players. There's going to be a cold day in hell before you find a MLB player who has a very good relationship with their owner. It just doesn't exist. Football is the same thing. It's next man up mentality. It's a different sport. It's a violent, combative sport. It's gladiatorial. It's American gladiators. They know what the deal is. They know that if they get injured, it's next man up. There's no Wally Pipp stories in the NFL because there's a Wally Pipp every single week in the NFL. Wally Pipp being the first baseman for the New York Yankees, who gave up his spot because he had a migraine to Luke Gehrig, and Luke never gave it back. Wally Pipp happens every single week in the NFL. There's a guy that goes down and a practice player steps up. A guy on the scout team will take a step up and end up on the active roster. Every single week in the NFL, something like that happens. It's a different sport. The NFL chewed up and spit out loyalty. They laugh at loyalty. Only quarterbacks get loyalty. And even then, the greatest quarterback of all time didn't have loyalty from his organization. Tom Brady had to go to Tampa Bay. They didn't think he was good enough anymore in New England. Bill Belichick said, we would rather cut you a season early than a season late. There's no loyalty in football, but basketball was the only one that we still had a little bit of semblance left. Basketball was the only one that we had a little bit of semblance that the generational stars of this league, the Tim Duncans, the Dirk Nowitzkis, the Kobe Bryants, the Paul Pierces, that if we're going to move you, we're going to put you in a position to succeed. Paul Pierce, KG, we don't think you can win here in Boston anymore. We want to do a rebuild. Where do you want to go? You want to go to Brooklyn? Well, let's make something happen. Russell Westbrook, you've done a ton here in Oklahoma City. Clearly, we are not going to get over the hump with what we have currently. Where do you want to go? You want to go play with your teammate and friend, James Harden, in Houston? We'll move heaven and earth. We'll take Chris Paul's contract back. Loyalty mattered in the NBA, but this week all of that disappeared in a cloud of smoke. And yes, the Luka Doncic trade will be the catalyst. That will be the thing that's talked about more than any other trade. But it's going to be this Kris Middleton move, a guy that gave his blood, sweat, and tears to the Bucks, and they sent him to the worst team in basketball. The worst team in basketball to a guy who gave everything to try to help your team win a championship. There's no loyalty in the NBA. There's no loyalty in sports anymore.